So, hello everyone. This is Archana Pradeshni, Assistant Professor, the Department of Information Science, Canara Engineering College. Let's see the next section under Module 2, which is Process Synchronization. And in this particular video presentation, we will look into the idea about the principle of concurrency, the raised conditions, and critical section problem, metaphors, mutex, and semaphores, along with the idea about monitors and different kind of classical synchronization problems. So let's study about the background for concurrency, the race condition, which then tells us about the critical section problem. The solution to this critical section problem will also be discussed along with mutual context, mutual exclusion, lock, and mutex logs, different kinds of logs, with Peterson's solution and classical problems of synchronization, and followed by monitors. So let's study the main objectives. First of all, the students must be aware about the concept of process synchronization, where exactly it is used, and the introduction to critical section problem, wherein we can identify how to ensure and what are the possible solutions that will ensure the consistency of shared data to present both software and hardware solutions of the critical section problem, and to discuss several classical synchronization problems. So as you know, cooperating process is the one which can affect or be affected by other processes, and this cooperating process may either directly share a logical address space or be allowed to share only through the files. And concurrent access to the shared data may result in data inconsistency. So what is this concurrency is that concurrency refers to any form of interaction among the processes or maybe threads. Most of the operating system can handle more than one process at a time, and there is a scheduler who manages all these processes and their competition to the CPU. Concurrency is good for users because they're working on the same problem, simultaneous execution of the programs and background execution, right? So concurrency creates a problems because of the access to the shared data structure, and there's also deadlock due to resource contention. But if you want to say about the problem, we can say that concurrency is really a problem because two or more calculations will happen within the same time and the data will be corrupted. While we can say parallelism is obviously a solution, and that is a possible way to implement concurrency. So concurrency arises in the same way at different levels of execution. Maybe concurrency in multi-programming is also possible. Concurrency in multi-threading is also possible. Concurrency in multi-processors and concurrency in multi-computers. And we can also illustrate the problem. Suppose we wanted to provide a solution to consumer producer problem. So you have seen this consumer producer problem in the previous presentations. So what is this consumer producer problem is that if the producer starts to produce the data, and it each producer and consumer has to wait for some particular time. What is this time is producer has to wait until all the items all the items are being received by the consumer, and consumer has to wait until the data is available for consuming. So at these 2 point intervals they have to wait. The problem is that it fills all the buffers. So we can have a counter. Suppose that one possibility is to add an integer variable counter which is initialized to 0. So counter is incremented each time when we add item into the buffer, and it is decremented each time once we remove item from the buffer. Okay, so in the procedure consumer problem we can understand this shared memory solution to the bounded buffer problem. we have this code for producer process. So in this producer process, the producer will go on producing an item, and that item will be stored in the next produce variable. Although these producer and consumer routines, they are working separately, but they may not function correctly when executed concurrently. So suppose that, just observe this code. We know that an item is being produced and it is been there in next produce variable, and the item which is there in next produce variable is moved on to the buffer in the respective locations, starting from 0 and so on. And each time the variable is, or the index pointer is incremented so as to take the next item that is produced and store it in the buffer in the buffer preferred size. So the array is implemented as a circular buffer, or we can have the circular buffer implemented here. And here you can observe that the counter is incremented. So as we have told, the counter, as and when the new item is added to the buffer, the counter will be incremented. So the first item is being produced, the counter will be incremented to 1. Counter was initially set to 0, right? So this tells us that one item is there in the buffer. Now again, next time whenever the producer produces the item, the the condition is checked whether it has reached the full buffer size, or else the next item that is being produced will be pushed onto the buffer, and the counter will be incremented saying that there are these many items available, or these many items produced by the buffer. Okay, so let's see the next code for consumer. So in this consumer process, you can see that the counter is 0. This tells us that when the counter is 0, it means that there is no item available to it by the consumer. So it has to wait until there is an item available. So whenever the item is available, it takes the data from the buffer with the help of the out pointer and then pushes on to the next consumed variable. So in this variable, the item will be available, and the out pointer is moved incremented up till the buffer size. Okay, and the counter will be decremented each time. It says that this counter value says that one item is being consumed. That's why counter is decremented. Counter is decremented, and at some point of time it reaches 0 where there is no item available to eat. Okay, so this is all about producer and consumer code. So what is this race condition? You have observed the code for producer and consumer. So what happens when two processes are executing concurrently is that, let's say counter plus plus is implemented, right? We have seen counter plus plus being incremented. Suppose the counter value was 5. Counter value was 5. So if the producer and consumer execute the statements counter plus plus and the consumer executes counter minus minus, this happens concurrently. So what would be the result? Counter plus plus means the counter value initially will be stored in the register 1, and the register 1 will then be incremented, and the incremented value of the register will be stored in the counter. So 5 will be moved on to the register 1 first, correct, because the counter value is set to 5. So 5 will be moved on to register 1, then register will be incremented to 6. So register 1 will be 6, and then the register 1 value, that is 6 value, will be moved to counter. So this happens if they are executing separately. Okay, so you can see the sequence of statements if they are interleaving in the sense both are executing concurrently. And in counter minus minus, if they are executing separately, what should be the value of the consumer code? So register 2 has the value of the counter, then register 2 is decremented, and then finally the decremented value will be put into the counter. So first counter was 5, right? 5 will be stored in register 2, and it will be 4 during register second operation. Register 2 will be 4, and 4 value will be stored in the counter. Actually we need to get 6 and 4 for the producer and the consumer, right? 6 and 4. But what happens when the if it means that the counter is 4, it states that there are 4 full buffers. Actually there are 5 full buffers, right? 5 full buffers. And if you reverse the order, we get as counter is 6. Okay, counter is 6. These are all incorrect values which we get. So interleaving. Consider this interleaving with count. See, observe the lines. So register 1 is having the value of counter, that is 5 first, and in S1 statement the producer, let's say, executes register 1 is register 1 plus 1. So the value of register 1 will be 5 plus 1, that is 6. Next, register 2 is having the counter value. Register 2 is having the counter value. So what will be the value of register 2 is again 5, because counter has got 5. Now let's see in the S3 statement the consumer executes register 2 is register 2 minus 1. So what will be the value? Register 2 will be, what is register 2? 5 minus 1, that is 4, correct? So in the S4 statement, producer again wants to execute counter is register 1. So what will be this value? Counter will be set to the immediate updated value, that is register 1 is register 1 plus 1. So you'll get counter is equal to 6, and S5 is consumer executes counter is equal to register 2. So what will be this updated value? What is there in register 2 is 4. So counter will be 4. So these two values are incorrect. These two values are incorrect. So if you have observed counter plus plus code wherein counter will be set to 6, and the same value of counter should be used by the consumer. 6 should be used by the consumer in the counter minus minus statement. But if they are interleaving like this, so it takes the wrong value of the counter. You can observe that the counter value is 4, which means that 4 items are consumed, right? 4 items are consumed. And but actually how many items are there in the buffer? We need to just calculate. The counter value is 5, right? Counter value is 5, and counter is 6 for the producer, means it has produced how many data items? 6 items. It has produced 6 items. Okay, some such kind of incorrect values are observed when two producer and consumer tries to interleave. So counter value is 4 means that there are 4 full buffers, and where in fact there are 5 full buffers. And if you reverse the order of T4 and T5, you would arrive at incorrect state counter is 6, right? To because we allow both the processes to manipulate the variable counter concurrently. So a situation like this where several processes access and manipulate the same data concurrently, and the execution or the outcome of the execution depends on the order in which the access takes place. It's called as a race condition. So how to guard against the race condition is we need to ensure that only one process at a time can be manipulating the variable counter. Okay, race condition should be avoided because there can be fine errors in the application. Okay, and race condition occurs when two or more operations occur in an undefined manner. What is a possible solution is to allow only one process to execute at a time or to be manipulating the same variable. So let's see the solution to this race condition. Let's see about critical section problem. So consider that there are set of n processes T0, P1 up till Pn minus 1, n processes, and each process has a segment of code called as critical section, in which the process may be changing common variables, updating a table, or maybe writing a file. Okay, so when one process is executing in the critical section, no other process is allowed to execute in the critical section. So that is the main condition of this critical section. But let me define what is a critical section then. So critical section is a block of code that only one process at a time can execute, so that when one process is in its critical section, no other process may be in its critical section. So this critical section problem is to ensure that only one process at a time is allowed to be operating in the critical section. So each process takes permission from the operating system to enter into the critical section. So there are sections here, that is entry section. So this is the basic structure of a process. There should be an exit entry section, there should be a remainder section, and finally an exit section. So what is this entry section is? It is a block of code executed in preparation for entering the critical section, whereas the remainder section will be the rest of the code, and exit section is the code executed upon leaving the critical section. So you can see the general structure of a particular process. First, for any do while loop, it will have an entry section, that is the initial condition. Next, the logical operations are performed in the critical section. Main operations may be updating the variable or writing data to a file and so on. And in the next section, you have got the exit section. This tells you when does the loop exit, in the sense for which condition the loop exits. And last, you have got the remainder section, which will be executed before completion. So we have got an algorithm for process pi. This is the structure of process pi. So what does this tell is that while turn is equal to is not equal to I, or if we can also say while turn not equal to I means it's not the process I turn, and it is process jth turn. Okay, we can say that turn is equal to j is same as turn not equal to I. So we are differentiating between two process pi and pj, right? So we are working with these two processes in order to say the importance of critical section. So in this section, you have got if it is j's turn, or if it's not the process I turn, do nothing, or if it's process j turn, do nothing. So now for process pi, if it has to enter, it directly enters the critical section. So this is the entry section code. You can observe the condition is given, which states that only process pi has to enter. So now it directly enters into the critical section, process pi. So once that process pi has completed executing the main task, it has to set the next turn to the jth turn, right? Process j turn. So turn will be set to j, and the remaining sections or the remaining code that is prevalent for process pi will continue in the remainder section. So clearly you can see the different sections of a process, right? First is the entry section, that is the main condition through which the process is allowed to enter into the critical section. Now with this, it is very clear that between two process pi and process pj, and it is the only process pi which comes and enters into the critical section. It is the only process which comes and enters into the critical section. And next will be set for the next process. The turn will be set for the next process. And what is the solution of critical section problem is, it must satisfy these three conditions. What is the first condition is? The first condition is it should satisfy mutual exclusion property. Next, it should satisfy progress requirement, and finally it should satisfy bounded waiting. Yeah, what is this mutual exclusion? Mutually exclusion means if there are two processes Pi and Pj, it is the if process Pi is executing in the critical section, then Pj should not come and execute in the critical section. It should be only process Pi which is entering into the critical section, and no other process must be executed in the critical section. Then it should also the solution to critical section problem says the progress requirement must be satisfied. That is, if no process is executing the critical section and some process wishes to enter into the critical section, then the selection of the process that will enter cannot be postponed indefinitely. That means if let's say if no process Pi or Pj nobody is executing, and let's say if Pi wants to enter into the critical section, then only those processes that are not executing the remaining section. In the remaining section, you may have several other codes which says that the next process should be this one. So if there is no process in the remainder section, then that process which wishes to enter can come into the critical section next. So and this cannot be postponed. And the next solution to critical section problem is bounded waiting. So what is this bounded waiting is there will be a certain bound or a limit on the number of times the process will be allowed to enter into the critical section after it has made a request. So there is a limit for which the process is allowed to enter into the critical section. So that is bounded waiting. So all if all these are satisfied, then we can say that we have given a solution to the critical section problem. So how is this approach followed if the kernel is preemptive and if the kernel is non-preemptive? How is it followed? Solution to critical section problem must satisfy all the properties that was mentioned in the previous slide, that is mutual exclusion, progress and bounded waiting parameters. And the software and hardware solution to critical section problem is available, right? Process using kernel is active in the system and race condition is implemented in the kernel code itself. The operating system handles the critical section problem by using the kernel. So kernel mainly is subdivided into preemptive and non-preemptive. In the preemptive code, the process is run in the kernel mode, then also it is preemptive. And the non-preemptive kernel does not allow the process to preempt. It runs until it exits the kernel mode, blocks or voluntarily eats the CPU. What is this Peterson solution? It is a software-based solution for critical section problem. So how does this actually work? This algorithm will not work correctly on modern systems, but it is a simpler algorithm for two process. If you take two process, it works good and fine well to solve the critical section problem. So it solves the critical section problem of two processes only, and it does not require any special hardware. So you can see that deadlock and indefinite postponement is impossible in Peterson's algorithm. Let's see the let's take an example of the code. Assume that load and store machine language instructions are atomic, and the two processes there are two processes here. Okay, we are going to they are going to share two variables, which is turn and boolean flag 2. So turn will be set to either process I or process j or process 0 or process 1. We can here we are giving the importance of process I, Pi and Pj. To denote, Pi refers to process I and Pj denotes process j, where process j is 1 minus I. Let's see the algorithm for process Pi. So now flag of I is set to true. So flag of I is set to true. That means the turn next line you can observe the turn is set to j. So if turn is I means the process Pi is allowed to execute in its critical section. Now it's process j's turn. to uh, uh, enter the critical section. So this solution will ensure that only one process at a time can be in the critical section. However, it does not satisfy any progress requirement. You can observe that flag of I is true. Okay, and the flag of if flag of I is true, this value indicates that process Pi is ready to enter the critical section. So here flag of I is true means process Pi is ready to enter into the critical section, but it is whose turn to enter the critical section? The turn is J. So the condition is set as while flag of J, that means while J is ready to enter the critical section and the turn is equal to J, do nothing. Okay, when both are satisfied, that is if process Pj is ready to enter into critical section and if the process Pj is allowed to execute into the critical section, do nothing, because we are seeing for process Pi. Even though process Pj is ready to execute in the critical section and it is process Pj's turn to come into the critical section, it has to do nothing. All the process Pi code will be executed in the critical section. So this uh, clearly states that you can observe the while condition or the while line. This clearly states that no matter whatever process wants to execute, just stopping that process or just preventing uh, it from entering into the critical section. So now we want process Pi, it is executed in the critical section. And next, flag of I is set to false. It means that process Pi is ready to enter into the critical section is set to false. So whose turn it is next? So any process which is not executing the remainder section can and who is ready to enter into the critical section can come into the critical section next. So Peterson's solution is that it provides three kinds of criteria. As we have seen, the solution for critical section problem is mutual exclusion, progress requirement, and bounded weighting. So in this, mutual exclusion is preserved. How mutual exclusion is preserved? Process P, we have seen the conditions for while loop. So even though it is J's turn and it is process J is ready to execute, it has to do nothing. Process Pi enters into the critical section. So currently we have seen that process Pi is ready to enter the critical section. So those processes can be moved into the critical section. Okay, and progress requirement is also satisfied. You can observe that progress requirement means uh, if no process is executing in the critical section. So now we have observed that process Pi is executing the critical section, and if any other process wishes to enter into the critical section, so we have also said the turn is equal to J, which means that next turn is process J. And we find that the turn is J is not there in the remainder section. That means no other process is executing in the remainder section. So the next turn will be process J turn. So there we have seen that the progress requirement is satisfied. And the third condition to ensure that the critical section problem is met is bounded waiting requirement. So we have set the bound on the number of times the process is allowed to enter. Alright, so that is bounded waiting. So number of times the process is allowed to enter. So this is only for the first time, wherein first time we can observe that process Pi is entering. Next, immediately we are setting the flag to false, which means that only for one time the process Pi is allowed to enter into the critical section. Next, again any other process can enter. So there is a limit on set on each process that has to enter into critical section. In that way, the three critical section requirements are met. We have satisfied the critical section problem. So in this synchronization hardware, we are going to see about these hardware as well as software solutions to critical section problem or for implementing the critical section code, and the solutions are implemented based on test and set operations. And also we are seeing about the idea of locks, this synchronization hardware. So in the previous slides we have seen about Peterson solution. Now, as with other aspects of software, hardware features can make the programming task easier. So we present some simple hardware instructions which are available on the systems in order to solve the critical section problem. So in case of a uniprocessor environment, we can forbid the interrupts to occur while the shared variable is being modified. In this manner, we could ensure that the current sequence of instructions would be allowed to execute in order and no other instructions would run in a uniprocessor environment. But however, in a multiprocessor environment, it is not feasible, right? So disabling interrupts is almost time consuming. So many machines provide special hardware instructions which allow either to test and modify the content of the word or to swap the contents of the two words atomically. So we have got a test and set instruction which is described in the next slide. So here we are using acquire lock. Locks are set. Locks are acquired first before entering into the critical section, and once the critical section code is satisfied, then the lock will be set to false, or it is possible to release a lock. In this way, we can ensure that one process is executed in the critical section and the no other process will be executed in the critical section. And here we can see the idea of test and set instruction. So we have set the value of boolean rv equals to target. So this is a test and set instruction, and most important characteristic is that the instruction is executed atomically. What you can observe is the target value is taken and stored it in rv, is stored in rv, and the target is set to true, and you're going to return the target. So whatever the target value may be, it is set to true. So if the target is false, okay, initially the target is set to true, and you're returning the value of rv, that is the whole target whatever you have initialized to. So this is the definition of test and set instruction. It is executed atomically without any interruption, atomically, and returns the original value of the pass parameter, but it sets the new value of the parameter to true. So we can implement the, if the machine supports test and set instruction, then we can implement mutual exclusion by declaring the boolean variable called lock. We can set the boolean variable called lock and can be initialized to false. So here you can see how the critical section is implemented. Solution to critical section is implemented. First, the lock is initialized to false, and we have called the test and set function. Previously you've seen about the test and set function. Boolean target, and the value of the target is taken, whatever may be the value of target. That target value will be updated, but however the new value of the target will not be used. The original value will be used. So that function has a parameter called lock, and lock is initially set to false. So if it is false, it is going to return the value of false itself, okay, as a return function. So initially the lock will be set to false. If the lock is false, you're not supposed to do anything. So only if the lock is set for a particular process, that process can enter the critical section. And once the lock is held for that process, means there is only one process executing in the critical section, and the lock for that process can be released by setting lock is false. In that way we can ensure that only one process will remain in its critical section, no other process will be executing in between. So here in this you are going to see that mutual exclusion implementation with the help of swap instruction. And here you can observe that there is a boolean variable called lock which is declared, and it is set to false. It is initialized to false, and each process has got a local boolean variable called key. So you can see that these data structures are initialized to false. There is a waiting array and key is set to true. So in order to prove that mutual exclusion requirement is met, we note that the process Pi can enter into the critical section only if either the lock is set. Here you can observe key is set to true. Okay, this key is set to true. So and also while key is true, if the key is set, the particular swap operation is called. Swap will be exchanging of the values of the boolean variables, and the lock and key values are exchanged. So lock is initially false. Lock is initially declared to false. So false and true, the values are exchanged, becomes true and false. Okay, and the particular process will be remaining executing the critical section. So now lock will be true. So particular process for will be executing the critical section, and then once it has completed the execution, the lock will be set to false. So this is how we can say that whenever the lock is set to true and it refers to a particular process, and only that process can gain access into the critical section, and lock can be set to false whenever the process has completed execution. Here we have seen the test and set instruction that was purely a hardware solution for critical section problem. So test and set of p comma q means that the instruction reads the value of q, which may be either true or false. Then the value is copied into p, and the instruction sets the value of q to true. Okay, so test and set is a single individual machine instruction, and in one machine cycle it tests to see if the key is available, and if it is, it sets it to unavailable. So any process P1 would test the condition using test and set instruction before entering the critical section. So in case if no process was there in the critical section, then the process P1 would be allowed to proceed and the condition code would be changed from 0 to 1. So what is the basic advantage of having this test and set instruction is that it is simple to implement and works well for small number of processes, but it suffers from starvation and there is a chance of busy waiting. So here they have implemented a bounded waiting mutual exclusion here wherein first waiting of I is set to true. This means that waiting of I is true or key is true means the same. Means the key is set for the process Pi. That means process Pi has to wait. So while waiting of I is true and key also is true for that process Pi. So you're going to implement test and set. That is changing the lock. Busy doing other processes. Test and set of lock. You're calling test and set of lock. Changing the lock value, and finally it has finished executing test and set. Okay, it is set to false. That means mm, the variable waiting of I can become false only if another process leaves the critical section. This happens because there is another process executing the critical section. That time process Pi has to wait. Then once the critical section process has completed, then waiting of I will become false. So only one waiting of I is set to false. Therefore, we can say that mutual exclusion principle is maintained. Next, in order to prove the progress requirement, we note that the arguments which are applied for mutual exclusion is also applies here. That is, since a process exiting the critical section either sets the lock to false, okay, or waiting of j to false, so we can say that both allow a process that is waiting to enter into the critical section to proceed. So the next process is J, right? J. as per the number of processes. Here they have taken a circular mode. The number of processes are waiting in a circular fashion, and j is the next process. While j not equal to I, that means if j was not there in the critical section, and if it's not waiting, that means if it is ready to enter into the critical section, it can proceed. That is j is j plus 1 mod n. And if j equal to I, lock is set to false. That means if process j is same as process I, lock is false. It means that at a time only one can enter and process I has already completed, if this is the case. Else, you can set waiting of j is false, and the next process after process pi to go into the critical section is process j. So it is very clear that even the bounded waiting requirement is met. You can observe that it array works in a cyclic manner from I plus 1 to I plus 2 up till 0 and I minus 1. So it designates the first process in this order. So waiting of j is equal to true as the next one to enter the critical section. So there will be n minus 1 turns, and you can observe that each particular process gets a turn, and there is a limit on the number of processes entering into the critical section. As you can observe in the particular line, if j is equal to I, then lock is false. So if it is the same process, for now it is blocked. So you are allowing for the next process in the array, that is j is j plus 1 mod n. So that's how the critical section problem is solved, by meeting all the requirements, that is mutual exclusion, progress requirement, and bounded waiting. Yes. So now let's talk about what is a mutex before moving on to what is the mutex law. Mutex is it is used to ensure only one thread at a time can access the resource protected by the mutex. Okay, so mutex is represented just by one bit. So 0 means unlocked and any other value represents locked. So it uses two procedures. It is when a process needs to access a critical section, it checks the condition for mutex lock. Okay, if the mutex is currently unlocked, then the calling process enters into the critical section. So mutex variables have only two states, and that's why it is very easy to implement. And simplest is a mutex block. So what is a lock? Lock is a shared variable. Okay, lock is a shared variable, and software mutual exclusion requires that the process reads a variable to determine that no other process is executing the critical session. So lock variable can be initialized with 0, and if we say lock is 0, then there is no process in the critical section, and if lock is set to 1, there is a process in the critical section. So mutex is represented by one bit. 0 means unlock and any other value means lock. So whenever process needs access to the critical section, it checks the condition called mutex locks. So here we have got calls to acquire and release lock. In order to protect the critical section, we first acquire a lock, and there will be certain calls to the in the critical section wherein the process can perform the task, and this is the in this critical region they may be writing data to memory, reading out data from the memory, and this critical region is an area of process which is very sensitive to inter-process complications. So after this, the process can release that particular lock, and there is a solution called busy waiting, and this lock therefore is called as a spin lock. So this is about acquire and release lock. So whenever a process wants to enter into the critical section, it has to acquire the lock. The lock has to be set for that particular process so that no other process can gain access into the critical region. So once the process has finished updating its variables or maybe writing into the memory or performing any such critical task, it has to set the lock to false. That is, it has to release the lock over the process. And then any other process which are there in the remainder section which wants to gain access into the critical section can continue by acquiring the lock. If you can just observe the acquire function there. So while it's not available, if the lock is not available, so it is just going in busy wait mode, or else the available is set to false. In case of release, the available is always set to true. It can always release the locks anytime. But in order to acquire a lock, the locks may not be available at every particular point. So if the lock is not available in such case, the process has to go in a busy wait mode. So let's see about semaphore. Semaphore is nothing but it's a synchronization tool. So what is the semaphore basically? It's an integer variable and it is accessed only through two kinds of operation, that is wait and signal. So these operations were originally termed P for wait and V for signal, and the definitions are given here. So semaphore is an operating system abstract data type. So it takes only integer value and it is used to solve the critical section problem. It is Distrust who introduced these two operations, P for wait and V for signal. And the process calls the P operation when it wants to enter into the critical section. So P is for wait, right? Whenever it wants to enter into the critical section, if it is it has to call this P operation or the wait operation, and it calls the signal operation or the V operation where if it wants to exit the critical section. So P operation is called as the wait operation and V operation is called as the signal operation. So just observe the weight of S. So what is this S? It's a semaphore and it always decreases by 1. So waiting counts decrements each time, and when it is less than or equal to 0, do nothing, or else you won't decrement the waiting time. Just you can observe that a signal operation is being incremented. So when do we use the signal operation is when it wants to exit the critical section. Signal of that semaphore, incrementing the semaphore by 1. So a semaphore operation is atomic, and the basic properties of semaphore is that they are machine independent. That means it is not dependent upon any machine. Semaphores can be implemented anywhere and it is easy to implement, and it may require many resources simultaneously. That's a problem. Once again, if you find the usage of this semaphore, there are two types of semaphores. They are counting semaphores and binary semaphores. So what is this binary? Binary semaphore, it is also called as mutex blocks, and it deals with a critical section for multiple processes. You're using this for multiple processes. And the binary value, semaphore value will be between 0 and 1. Whereas in counting semaphore, it is used with the resource which has got finite number of instances. So it works over the unrestricted domain. And there is another kind of semaphore called as a weak semaphore and strong semaphore. Weak semaphore, it is a semaphore which does not specify the order in which the processes are removed from the queue. Whereas strong semaphore, it is a process that has been blocked. The longest is released from the queue first. So that is called as a strong semaphore. So you can see here that we have got two processes, process P1 and P2, that require S1 to happen before S2. So you are creating a semaphore sync and which is initialized to 0. So first the S1 is required to execute, after that S2. You can observe that first we have got the P1, process P1. In P1, S1 is executed and there is a signal of sync which is initialized to 0. Next, we have got process P2 where wait of the same sync is initialized, and next S2 is to be executed. So the most of the systems guarantee that no two processes can execute the wait and signal on the same semaphore at the same time. That is, while a process is in its critical section, any other process that tries to enter must loop continuously in the entry code. So this continual looping is a problem, right, in real-time systems where a single CPU is shared by many processes. So that is called as a busy waiting. So busy waiting, it waits or it just wastes system or CPU cycles that some other process might be able to use. So this type of semaphore is called as a spin lock, because the process will be continuously spinning while waiting for the lock. But spin locks are useful in multiprocessor systems. The basic advantage of spin lock is that no context switch is required whenever a process must wait on a lock, and because context switch may take considerable amount of time. So to overcome the need of busy waiting, so we can modify the wait and signal constructs by having that the process executes the wait operation and finds that the semaphore value is not positive. So when it finds that the semaphore value is not positive, it must wait. It must wait. However, rather than busy waiting, the process can block itself. So the block operation, it places the process in the waiting queue associated with the semaphore. We'll see that in the next session. So here we have implemented two operations called as block and wake up. Okay, this is the basic construct of semaphore. We are using a structure, and it has got a value and process as a mentioned as a list. The process that is blocked waiting on a semaphore S should be restarted when some other process executes a signal. So two operations. With each semaphore there is a queue, and each entry in the queue has got two items, the value and the pointer to the next record. So two operations, block operation suspends the process that invokes it, and wake up operation, it resumes the execution of the blocked process. So you can see the primitives wait and signal. So in this wait we have called the semaphore S. So whenever a process executes a wait operation, so here there is a wait operation executed by a process. So this when does it wait is it must whenever it finds the semaphore value not positive. Here semaphore value is each time it is decremented, and at one point of time it may be less than 0. If it is less than 0, that is if it is not positive, it must wait. So in that case, instead of waiting, it is blocked. You can observe here there is a block function called. So uh, the and in another signal operation you have got the block wake up operation, wake up of the same process which was blocked. So wake up of P, it resumes the execution of the block process P. So these two operations are provided by the operating system as a basic system calls. The process that is blocked should be restarted when some other process executes the signal operation. You can observe signal means the value is incremented, semaphore count is incremented, and whenever it is less than equal to 0, it removes the process from the block list and resumes the operation of the block process. So next is about deadlock and starvation. So in previously we studied about wake up and block, and as well as wait and signal operations. So the implementation of semaphore with a waiting queue, it may result in situation where two or more processes are waiting indefinitely for an event. So if two or more processes are indefinitely waiting for an event, then such a state is called as the deadlock state. Consider here two semaphores S and Q, the two semaphores, and we are considering a system of two processes P0 and P1, and each of them are accessing semaphores S and Q. Okay, first in process P0, we have got P0 executing wait of S and then P1 executing wait of Q. And when P0 executes wait of Q, it must wait until P1 executes signal of Q. Right? Similarly, when P1 executes wait of S, it must wait until P0 executes signal of S. Since these signal operations cannot be executed, we can say P0 and P1 are in a deadlock state. Got it? So we say that the set of process is in a deadlock state when every process in the set is waiting for an event that can be caused by only other process in the set. So another problem related to deadlock is indefinite blocking or starvation. So what is this indefinite blocking? So it is a situation where a process needs to wait indefinitely within the semaphore. It is not given any chance. So there is also called as a priority inversion, where lower priority process holds a lock needed by the higher priority process. So let's see the important classical problems of synchronization. So the first problem is bounded buffer problem. Next we have got readers and writers problem. And the third problem is the dining philosopher problem. So coming to the first problem of bounded buffer problem. So this is commonly used to illustrate the power of synchronization primitives. Now let's consider a pool of n buffers, and these n buffers, each of them, they are holding one particular item. Okay, so the mutex semaphore, here we have got three types of semaphores, right? Mutex, empty and full semaphores. The mutex semaphore provides mutual exclusion for access to the buffer pool and it is initialized 1, whereas empty and full semaphores count the number of empty and full buffers. So full buffer is initially it will be 0, right? So it is assigned the value 0. Similarly, empty buffer is initialized the value as n. So let's see the structure of producer process. So in the producer code, first we know that the buffer is used between the producer and the consumer, and buffer size may be fixed or variable. So producer starts producing the item, and this producer cannot deposit data if the buffer is full. So now it starts producing a single item, and that item is stored in next produce. Okay, so first what happens is the uh, counter or the item will be produced, and then it has to wait for the empty. That means empty value is set to the value n, right? Empty value is set to those n buffers, so wait of n. So it has to wait for some time for until those n buffers have been released or it has been consumed. So once next it calls the weight of mutex. So either the mutual exclusion property is served. So then it adds the next produce to the buffer. So in case the buffer is full, we can observe that weight of empty, the weight of n, since the buffer is full means it has to wait. Otherwise, it adds the next item that is produced to the buffer. Otherwise, if the buffer is full, it cannot add the next item to the buffer, right? So during this process of adding the item into the buffer, the mutual exclusion is set, and then the signal for that mutex lock is released, and the signal of full will be uh, initialized. That is, full value is 0, right? Full is set to the value 0 initially, the signal of that full is executed. Next we have the consumer process. So what is done in this consumer process is the consumer will actually should be allowed to retrieve a data if the buffer contains the data. So the consumer retrieves the data item, so the data from the buffer starts decreasing, and when buffer becomes empty, the producer should be allowed to deposit the data. So the problem majorly occurs when the buffer is full and the producer wants to add the data. The solution to this is producer should go to sleep until consumer removes the data from the buffer. So similarly condition may also exist with the consumer. When the consumer wants to consume the data from the buffer but the buffer is empty, then the consumer can go to sleep. So in order to synchronize these operations, there are we can have both the producer and consumer block on some condition. Example of producer consumer problem is the printing the word file. When the user gives a print option, the word processor pulls the data to the buffer and the data are consumed by the printer as it prints the document. So printer stops printing when the buffer is full, when the buffer is empty, right? So similar situation we can observe when the buffer is empty, when the buffer is full, or when it is a partially empty buffer. So coming back to this consumer process, so first it waits until the buffer is waits for the buffer to get full. Next, it has a mutual exclusion lock set over to the consumed data. So first if you want to consume data, it sets a mutex lock. Now it starts removing the item from the buffer and puts it into the variable called next consume, and it signals the mutex lock. That means that particular item has already been consumed by the consumer. Next, it also signals the empty semaphore. Oh, what is there in empty is the value of the next item that has to be consumed. So the next item can be allowed for consumption by the consumer. So let's see about readers writers problem. Here a data object will be shared among several processes, right? Some of the processes they want to read and they are called as readers, and some of the processes are interested in writing only, they are called writers. Writers can both read and write, whereas readers can only read. But the problem is if we allow multiple readers to read at the same time and multiple writers, it is not possible. If however if a writer object simultaneously does, then there will be adverse effects, right? So to ensure these do not occur, we require that the writers have exclusive access to the shared object. That means at a time only one person will be writing over to the shared data. So we have used a semaphore called RW, that is read write mutex, and mutex and read count is an integer which is initialized to 0. So two semaphores are used, that is read write mutex and mutex. The mutex is initialized to 1 and the semaphore read write mutex is also initialized to 1. So we can also apply the rules for access order, that is if the writer is waiting for readers to be finished, do not allow any more readers. But if a reader is waiting for a writer to finish, give certain priority or give reader priority. If a reader is having higher priority than the writer, then there will be starvation with the writers. So that's a problem. So next is about the structure of writer process. Structure of writer process. So you can observe that there is read write mutex, and the read write mutex was set to 1, and even the mutex was also set to 1, right? But the read count, number of count it was read is set to 0. So these are the semaphores, read write mutex which was set to 1. First, it waits for some read write mutex. That is, it waits for the particular mutex and then it starts writing. So writing operation is performed by the certain process, a writer process, and then the signal of the same mutex is acquired. So mutex semaphore is used to ensure mutual exclusion when the variable read count is updated. So as of now, the writer process has written a particular data. So read count, we are using another variable called read count that will be used to track of how many process read the object. But we have got semaphore read write mutex which functions as a mutual exclusion semaphore for the writers. So this is about the reader's process. So far we have seen about the writer process where it whenever it performs a write operation, it asks for the read write mutex to be set. So read write mutex, it is common to both reader and writer, so it has to wait. Any other process has to wait, and then only the process that requires the writing operation is performed, and then signal operation is sent over the same mutex. That is happening in writer process. We have seen in the previous slide. So now in this particular slide, let's see about reader process. First of all, the wait operation is called over the mutex. So there is a mutual exclusion which is set for the process which requires to read. So all the variables are protected. You can observe that read count in order to update the read count. So here read count is plus plus, read count plus plus. That means there is one item that has to be read. So in order to set a lock over to this variable, you are asking for mutual exclusion lock in the just before this. That is wait of mutex is executed before read count plus plus. And once read count, if the read count value variable reaches 1, then you're asking for the read write mutex. So the read count variable keeps track of how many processes are reading the object. So there is one process which is reading the object, so you are acquiring the lock, read write mutex lock, and then releasing the mutual exclusion lock. But the lock for read write mutex is there. That means readers and writers together concurrently cannot perform the same operation over the shared data. That kind of lock is maintained, but only the mutual exclusion lock is released so far now. Now the reading operation can happen, and then there is another operation called as wait of mutex, wherein the mutual exclusion lock is once again set so as to decrement the how many processes which have read the item. So currently there is one process which have already read the item, so read count is decremented to read count minus minus. And once if the read count has reached the value 0, then you are signaling both the mutex, that is read write mutex, as well as mutual exclusion lock are released. So here there is another variation of readers writers problem. That is, first variation is no reader is kept waiting unless the writer has permission to use the shared data. And the second variation, once writer is ready, it performs the write operation. Both may stop in some cases. So the readers may, if they are having higher priority than the writer, then there will be starvation with the writers. For writer having higher priority than reader, then starvation is possible with readers. So in both case, starvation may be possible. The third kind of synchronization problem is the dining philosopher's problem. So this is one of the classical problems, and here we assume that there are five philosophers who are seated around the circular table, and they spend their lives thinking and eating. So there are five plates with five forks which are kept on the circular table. And while philosophers think, they ignore the eating and do not require fork. When a philosopher decides to eat, then he or she must obtain two forks, one from the left side and the other from the right side. The philosopher can pick only a single fork at one time. So that is a condition. There is a bowl of rice and the semaphore chopstick 5 is initialized to 1. For after consuming the food, the philosophers replace the fork and starts again thinking. So they'll circular the process happens between thinking and eating. So philosopher may pick up only one chopstick at a time. That's why the semaphore chopstick of 5 for the 5 philosopher, it is initialized to 1. You can just observe the algorithm here. There's a structure for philosopher I, any philosopher I, weight of chopstick of I. So the philosophers have to uh, whenever they are hungry, they have both their chopsticks at the same time, and they eat without releasing the chopstick. But when they have finished eating, they put down both of the chopstick and start thinking. So how is this implemented is there is a semaphore chopstick of I, where all the elements of chopstick are initialized to 1, and we are presenting a solution, that is here we can see the structure for a philosopher, the weight to get the particular chopstick for that philosopher, and the other chopstick can be obtained until and unless the left hand side has released the chopstick. So chopstick of I plus 1 mod 5. So if the neighbors have released the chopstick, the philosopher is waiting. Okay, that is the first is waiting to get a particular chopstick, and because he has to obtain both the chopsticks in order to eat, right? So one chopstick from the neighbor side, that is I plus 1 mod 5, and chopstick of her own. There are 5 individual chopsticks. Okay, each one is given a chopstick. There are 5 minimum. So if a person is hungry, she takes her chopstick, and then he checks for the neighbors. If the neighbor is thinking, he can get the neighbor's chopstick. So that is the operation called weight of chopstick of I plus 1 mod 5, and then he can start eating without releasing the chopstick, and then after eating they can signal both the chopstick, one from her and one for her neighbor. But what is the problem with this algorithm? So basic problem is we must allow at most 4 philosophers to be sitting simultaneously at the table. But here currently how many philosophers are there? 5 philosophers. In order to ensure freedom from deadlock, we must allow at most 4 philosophers to be sitting simultaneously at the table, and we must allow a philosopher to pick the chopsticks only if both the chopsticks are available. Otherwise they must start thinking, and then use a asymmetric solution, that is odd philosopher picks up her left chopstick and then her right chopstick, whereas even philosopher picks up her right chopstick then her left chopstick. So let's see the next concept, that is about monitors. So what is a monitor? Basically a monitor is an object and which contains data and procedures needed to perform the allocation of shared resource. You can see how the structure of monitor is. First we have got a monitor, followed by the monitor name that we can mention, and a list of procedures. So it contains data as well as procedures needed in order to perform the allocation of shared resource. And it is a programming language construct which supports both data access synchronization and control synchronization. And the basic structure you have seen, first it may contain the shared data and all the condition variables, followed by entry methods, local methods, and initialization. So the representation of the monitor consists of declaration of variables as well as bodies for procedures or functions. What does the monitor construct do is it ensures that only one process at a time can be active within the monitor. The program does not need to code the synchronization constraint explicitly. So for this purpose, there are we need to define additional synchronization mechanisms. The mechanisms are provided by condition construct. So you can see them in the next slides. So here we have got a schematic view of a monitor. So it is an abstract data type for which only one process may be executing a procedure. So there will be set of operations and there is an entry queue wherein only one process is allowed within the monitor section, and monitor section is a collection of procedures, variables and data structure, and data inside the monitor may be either global to all the routines or may be local, and this kind of monitor data is accessible only within the monitor. So whenever a process calls a monitor procedure, the first few instructions of the procedure will check to see if another process is currently active, and if the process is active, then the calling process will be suspended until the other process has left the monitor, and if no other process is using the monitor, the calling process may enter. So every conditional variable will have an associated queue. That's why you can see there the queue, and the condition variables operates on respective functions. So you can see condition x comma y. So these mechanisms are provided by condition construct. What synchronization mechanisms are provided by condition construct. So a programmer needs to write their own synchronization scheme, that is they can define one or more variables of the type condition, and only operation that can be invoked on the condition variable are wait and signal. So if I say x dot wait, it means that the process invoking this operation is suspended until another process invokes x dot signal. So x dot signal operation resumes exactly one suspended process. So if no process is suspended, then the signal operation has no effect. So now suppose that the x dot signal operation is invoked by a process P. Then there is a suspended process Q associated with condition X. Okay, so let's say x dot signal operation is invoked by a process P, and this if we have got x dot signal operation which is invoked by process P, then there is a suspended process Q associated with X. Clearly, if the suspended process Q is allowed to resume, then the signal process P must wait. Otherwise, both P and Q will active simultaneously within the monitor. So these are the queues you can observe both for condition variables X and Y. For each of the variables, there will be a queue, and there will be respective operations, and the variables may be declared either global or local. Now let's see the possible choices for condition variables. If process P invokes the x dot signal and process Q is suspended in x dot wait, what should happen? So both Q and P cannot execute in parallel. So for now the process P invokes x dot signal, and process Q is suspended in x dot wait. So clearly the suspended process Q is allowed to resume, then the signaling process P must wait. Right? Because at a time only one process can continue. But the options are signal and wait or signal and continue. These are the possible options. So P either waits until Q leaves the monitor or it waits for another condition. That is in the case of signal and wait. And in signal and continue, Q either waits until P leaves the monitor or it waits for other condition. So both have got reasonable arguments to favor about. So since P was already executing the monitor, choice 2 seems correct because uh, P until P leaves the monitor, Q has to wait. That is the correct option. However, if we allow process P to continue the logical condition for which Q was waiting, that time Q may be resumed. So monitors are implemented in concurrent Pascal compromise. They are usually implemented in other languages like C Sharp, Java, so on. So let's see the dining philosophers, which is a part of solution to monitor. You can see the code. We have described a monitor name called dining philosophers, and enum is a construct. We are using this kind of data structure enum of thinking, hungry, eating, because the philosophers can be either in any of the three states out of the five for the five philosophers. So you can, that's why we declared five here, the number five. The philosophers, five philosophers are can be in either of the state, thinking, hungry, or eating. So this kind of solution is a deadlock-free solution to dining philosophers problem. Let's see how this is achieved. So let philosopher I set the variable state of I to eating. Okay, if she set the state of I to eating, it means that this is possible only if her two neighbors are not eating, right? That means he can pick up both the chopsticks. That is state of I plus 4 mod 5 is not equal to eating. So this happens if the neighbors are not eating. And state of I plus 1 mod 5 not equal to eating. That's the immediately next neighbor. Maybe left hand side and right hand side. Both are not eating. So he has to test both the conditions. State of I plus 4 mod 5, which may be the left side, and state of I plus 1 mod 5 may be the right hand side. Both chopsticks should be available. So this is the condition for test. And we also need to declare condition self of 5. So what is this exactly is the philosopher I can delay herself when she is hungry, but he's unable to obtain the chopsticks. So this is also very important. So let's describe the solution to dining philosopher's problem. So the distribution of chopsticks is controlled by the monitor here, and each philosopher before starting to eat must invoke the operation called pickup. There is a pickup you can observe, and after successful operation, the philosopher may eat. So he tries to pick up, and so it will check the state. If the state of that philosopher is hungry, he has to test whether both the chopsticks are available. Test of 5. So wherein the particular condition is checked, whether if two chopsticks are available, and if the state of 5 is not equal to eating, that means if the current philosopher is not eating, self of 5 dot wait. So, after the completion of the operation, the philosopher may eat. The philosopher may invoke the put down operation. He starts to eat, right? He starts to eat and does not put down the chopstick until he finish eating. So, the philosopher I must invoke the put down operation after eating, and then we start to think. So, you can see that in put down operation, state of I will be turned to thinking after eating. And again you will test the two chopsticks. If the chopsticks are available, and if that particular philosopher is hungry, and if he is not eating, then starts to eat. So in this way, the philosopher must invoke the operations pick up and put down following the sequence. First will be pick up operation, and then will be put down operation. So during the pick up and put down operation, the philosopher can eat. And it is easier to show that no two neighbors are eating simultaneously, and that no deadlocks will occur. We can see here in the test condition, we test both of the neighbors that and ensures that they are not eating. Only if they are not eating, the other person can eat, because there are at most 5 chopsticks. Okay, at most 5 chopsticks. So deadlock won't occur. That means the person who is hungry, who wants to eat, will will have the available chopsticks. There is no possibility of deadlock. And we note that, however, it is not. It is possible for a philosopher to starve to death. And we can also consider the possible implementation of monitor mechanism using semaphores. So this is another solution, the continuation of the previous one, that is it test. So this test condition was to check for both the neighbors, right? As I mentioned, if state of I plus 4 mod 5. Okay, if state of I plus 4 mod 5, that is if I is the first person, okay, 1 plus 4 mod 5, it is, what is the result? It is 0. Okay, so if the previous neighbor, that maybe is the right hand side, if the previous neighbor is not eating, and if the state of the current philosopher is, if he is hungry, and if the state of I plus 1 mod 5, let's say 2 mod 5, the next neighbor, okay, that means if I was 1, it is 2. So his left hand side neighbor represents state of I plus 1 mod 5, not equal to eating. So if he is also not eating, if his left neighbor is not eating, and similarly if his right neighbor, that is state of I plus 4 mod 5, if he is not eating, and if the current philosopher is hungry, he starts to eat, he can observe state of I equals to eating. And once he has finished eating, he declares that to release the chopstick, self of I dot signal. And the initialization code takes from assuming that all the philosophers initially start thinking. And this is the basic solution to dining philosophers a problem, and each philosopher I it invokes the pickup and put down operation in the sequence, that is pickup. During the pickup operation, it starts to test for the conditions whether both the chopsticks are available. If so, and he starts grabbing the chopsticks and wait and then start eating, or else after eating he puts down the chopsticks and again starts to think. So there is no deadlock, but there is a chance that starvation may be possible. So this is a monitor implementation using semaphores. So for each monitor, semaphore mutex is initialized to 1, and process must execute wait of mutex before entering the monitor always, and must execute signal of mutex after leaving the monitor. That is the condition, entry and exit code. Since the signaling process must wait until the resume process either leaves or waits, we have defined another semaphore called next. So next is initialized to 0, on which the signaling process may suspend themselves. And there is an integer variable called next underscore count, which is provided to count the number of processes suspended on next. So this is the procedure f, which will be replaced by this particular code, that is wait of mutex, and signal mutex says about the entry points, and in between we have got a procedure called f. If the next underscore count, so next underscore count tells us the count of the number of processes suspended, count of number of processes suspended on next. So if the count is greater than 0, then you need to signal next. So next tells you about the signaling process which was made until the resume process either leaves. So next is also initialized to 0 here. So once the resumed process leaves, then signal process uh, can enter, or you can say the signal process must wait until the resume process either leaves. So we have, for that purpose, we have defined the next semaphore, and which was initialized to 0. So the next process can come into the monitor section and start executing. Till then it is not allowed to execute. Only the corresponding process which is there already in the monitor can perform its execution. And because of the next count which tells the number of processes suspended. So if the number of processes suspended is greater than 0, so this count is very important for in order to resume the next process which has been waiting until there was process within the monitor. So this ensures that mutual exclusion within the monitor is ensured. So there are special condition variables. So we can display these condition variables. Let's see how this is implemented. For each condition x, so we introduce what is called as a semaphore x underscore sem, and there is an integer variable x underscore count, which both of them are initialized to 0. So this is the x dot wait operation. So let's see what is this x dot wait operation, and next let's see what is x dot signal operation. So first of all, x underscore count is incremented. So the count of the integer variable which was initialized to 0 is incremented first. Then if the next underscore count is greater than 0, that is if the number of signaling process that was waiting for it is greater than 0, are going to signal the next, that is if the number of process suspended, if there are many number of processes which are suspended and whose you are going to signal the all the suspended process or the signaling process which has to come into the monitor, else signaling mutex, in the sense you are giving a lock. And wait underscore x underscore sem, so it calls once again for the same semaphore. These are the condition variables which are set. And next x underscore count is decremented. The count of this process which we are executing is decremented. So you can observe that initially there will be one particular process, then the number of suspended process which is going into the monitor will decrease with x underscore count minus minus. So the same thing is about x dot signal. So in this x dot signal operation, so you can observe that if the count x underscore count is greater than 0, if x underscore count is greater than 0, so the count of the next underscore count will be incremented, and that is the number of signaling process will start to resume, and there is a signal over x underscore sem, and we also call the wait of next. So this is useful for understanding how the suspended process will start its resumption. So you're incrementing the counter for the next suspended process, and if that count is greater than 0 only, you're going to say that you're going to signal those suspended process. So actually this entire code is for signaling the suspended process. Only if the count turns greater than 0, you are incrementing the count and you are saying that the suspended process has to be executed, and the next suspended process which was waiting in the queue must wait until that previous suspended process has completed its execution. So next underscore count will be decremented, which says that one suspended process has already completed with the execution. So resuming processes within monitor. Let's say if there are several processes which are suspended on the condition X, and X dot signal operation is executed by some process. Then how do we determine which of the suspended process should be resumed next? So one simple solution is to use FCFS ordering, so that process waiting the longest will be resumed next, next, right? So in many ways we can use a simple scheduling algorithm, but it is actually not adequate. So there is also a conditional wait construct which can be used, and it will have the form called as x dot wait of c. And there is a conditional wait construct which has got form x dot wait of c, where c is an integer expression and that is evaluated when the wait operation is executed. So what is the c? It is a priority number. It is then stored with the name of the process that is suspended. So when x dot signal is executed, the process with the smallest associated priority number is resumed next. This is for a single resource allocation. In case of monitor, you can observe that there are two entities called as acquire and release. Acquire of the particular time. So there is a specific time during which the process is allocated the resources, and monitor is going to allocate the resource to the process which has got the shortest time period or the shortest time allocation request. And each process, when requesting an allocation to the resource, it specifies the maximum time it plans to use the resource. Here R is an instance of type resource allocator, and this it has got two built-in functions, acquire and release. So when it wants to acquire, it specifies the time, and if it is busy, then it has to wait for some time, or else it can access the resource, and once it has accessed the resource, it can release the resource. So this is a monitor construct. You can observe we have called the monitor name called resource allocator, okay, and there is variable called boolean busy and condition x. So what is this condition? For each condition variable there is a q, as I've told, and the condition variables have got specific operations like wait and signal, right? So actually in a monitor construct we cannot guarantee that the access follows in a particular sequence. There is a process might access the resource without first gaining any access permission, or there are chances that the process might never release the resource once it has granted. So there are several such conditions. So here what we are doing is we are setting a particular time, that is each process will specify a particular time during which the access it takes over the resource, okay. So we have called functions of from the resource allocator, that is acquire and release. The acquire, it we have specified a particular parameter called as time, and if initially the busy is set to false, right, though no process, there will be no process, and there is no process which are acquiring the resources. So once it is initialized to acquire, so it checks for the busy condition. So if it is false, then uh, then it can ask for the resources, else it has to wait. So here if busy means, if the busy is true, then it has to wait for some particular time, or else, and it can set the busy to true. Once it has acquired the resources, okay, once it has acquired the resources, it can access directly the resources and set, and it can set the busy to false during the release, and you're calling the signal operation for that process. So here we can see the basic advantages of monitors versus semaphore. In monitors, it is a high level kind of construct, whereas semaphore is a abstract, it is a low type of construct. And you can observe that in monitors, the basic advantage is mutual exclusion is automatic. It is not enforced. And these kind of condition variables are used automatically, and it is used only in monitors. But the condition variable is not exactly used in semaphores. However, semaphores are machine independent, but they allow more than one thread to access the critical section. But in monitors, you can observe that only one process can run at a time, and shared variables are global to all the processes in the monitor, while shared variables are hidden in the semaphores. And in semaphores, there is no spinning. That means waiting for the resource, and hence no wastage of resource due to no busy waiting. So this is the exact difference between semaphore versus monitor. In semaphore, there is a variable which controls the access for multiple processes, whereas in a monitor, a synchronization construct which allows the threads to have both mutual exclusion and the ability to wait for some condition. In semaphores, semaphore is basically an integer variable, whereas monitor is an abstract data type, conserve data and procedures. And in semaphore, it invokes the wait and signal operation. But here there are several set of procedures to access the shared variable in the monitor. And you have also observed that in monitor there are condition variables, and for each of the conditional variables you have got respective queues, and there is no such kind of condition variables in semaphores. In semaphores, there is no chance of spin lock, but here there are chances of spin lock. But the basic drawback of semaphore is the shared variables are not they are actually hidden in semaphore, but here the monitor shared variables are globally accessible, and access to the semaphore can come from any program anywhere in the program. That is also a drawback. There's a lot of security issues, but here access to the monitor can be gained only with the help of the appropriate date exit entry and exit code. So these are the basic differences between semaphores versus monitors. And we have also seen several synchronization problems, and these two ensure synchronization. So however, monitors are used to simplify the complexity of synchronization problems. Even semaphore level synchronization are quite difficult to use, but the monitors are when compared to semaphores are they simplify the complexity of synchronization problems. So that's all for module 2. Thank you.